finishing up my PhD in microbiology at the University of British Columbia. And I'm very excited about the alternative food space and started a company to brew designer oils for the cosmetic and food industries to replace animal and palm-based fats and oils. So providing a more sustainable solution. And I'm very excited to introduce to you our speakers, and I'll also let them to say a few sentences. So let's start with Amy. Amy is a University Innovation Specialist at the Good Food Institute, GFI. If you haven't heard of GFI, you should definitely follow them. They are a great organization that is working with scientists, innovators, investors, entrepreneurs to advance plant and cell-based meats and other products. And Amy, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Raf. Again, it's so cool to see some familiar names in the audience, and I'm really glad to be here today. So, like Raf said, I work for the Good Food Institute, which is a nonprofit organization focused on advancing alternative protein research and innovation. So we work with folks from all along the change-making process, from scientists to entrepreneurs to policymakers to legacy food companies, all in the hopes of facilitating this transition, or rather accelerating the transition to an animal-free food system. And my role within that is that I help lead our university innovation efforts. And that means that I'm focused on getting as many students and faculty, researchers into the alternative protein field as I can. That means helping universities expand their activity in this space, like building courses and constructing research centers. And it means talking to mostly young scientists and engineers to help them build the skills needed to enter this field. So super excited to be here and excited to be meeting, excited to have this discussion with all of these other awesome panelists.
Perfect. And if we have any young innovators, scientists here listening to us, I hope we can inspire you, because this space really needs you. So moving on to Patricia. She is a co-founder and CEO of Orbillion Bio. Maybe you have to tell us what Orbillion stands for. And so she has a PhD in biotechnology, and little fun fact, she also started the Millet Project while she was doing her postdoc at Berkeley University, which ignited her interest to look into the future of food. And Patricia, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Raphael, and super happy to be on this panel, and can only echo what Amy said. Please get into this field. We need more talent in here. We discussed it before that also. Right now, as Raphael said, I just started Orbillion Bio with my two co-founders recently, and we are looking for talent, and it's really needed. More people that are specialized. As Rafa said, my background is in biotechnology, process engineering. I'm originally from Austria and studied chemical engineering at one point, meaning that if you're really interested in this space, we need people from a variety of backgrounds that bring their knowledge into that space. And it is thanks to the GFI that I'm into this space too, because they have been an amazing resource for me since the times of the millet projects, where we were establishing millets as drought-tolerant plants in California that was suffering from a historic drought at the time we started the project. And then I realized that there is much more to do in this field, and there's a lot to do in both plant-based and cell-based fields. Orbillion Bio is a cultivated meat company, so we are aiming at making meats without the animals, real meats. But I think the future also lies in a lot of hybrid forms where plant-based and cell-based forms are not separate from each other. And there's actually a conference that I'm co-organizing this fall that deals with both, with meats from the plant-based and cell-based side. And there are some interesting sessions. So that's the EMEC conference if you want to check that out, Emerging Meat Alternatives. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Patricia. Sorry, what was the name of the conference?
EMEC, Emerging Meat Alternatives, organized by the AICG.
Cool, great. No, maybe you wanna put a link in the chat for everyone. So all right, let's like to introduce Chris Bryson. So we have two Chris's here today. A little confusing, but we'll manage it. So Chris founded an e-commerce software provider, Unata, in 2011, and is now an investor and startup mentor in the alternative protein space. For example, he is advisor for Plantable Foods, a company that produces one of the most sustainable proteins by farming the amazing water plant duckweed. And he's a mentor at the ProVeg Incubator and a member of the Glasswall Syndicate, a large venture capital investing group that is investing in transforming technologies to better the planet. And the fun fact about Chris is that he is a badass drummer and has a band called Set the Sun. Okay, Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit more about?
Yeah, you caught me a little off guard there, Raph. I like the surprise reveal. So thanks for the introduction. Very excited to be here today, and I think I'll jump on the love train for GFI. One of the other things that I'm spending a lot of my time with is figuring out how to get back into an executional capacity. So because I'm looking at all these wonderful startups in the plant-based and the cell-based side, I'm getting, as I was telling Patricia a little earlier, a little envious of all the founders out there and want to get my feet wet again. And I think that GFI is such an incredible resource for finding information, for getting help, for getting connected, whether it's through their database. So if you're not already signed up, sorry if I'm plugging GFI here, but I think that, try to go to their website and use all their resources. It's fantastic. So I'll also echo the point that we need way more founders. We need way more startups in this space. There's still a lot of white space, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks for having me.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. Okay, then let's get going. So I will address some questions, and then later on we will open up the floor for the Q&A part, and we'll also try to address, or definitely will address, some of the questions that have been sent in previously from the attendees. But maybe to start off, should maybe clarify for people to get a better understanding what is actually cellular agriculture. And what is the difference between this technology and a plant-based food or the biotechnology space? And maybe Amy, do you want to address this question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take a first stab at this. What I didn't clarify before is that GFI, when we say alternative protein, we mean primarily three technology areas. The first is plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. So that's recapitulating the sensory experience and the nutritional composition of real animal products, but just using plants or fungi. The second technology area is fermentation. So using fermentation technologies to pretty much do the same, usually to create ingredients for alternative protein products. And the third is, I think, the focus of this discussion, something we call cultivated meat, driven by a process called cellular agriculture. And what that means is that we are essentially growing or cultivating genuine animal meat, but directly from animal cells, rather than by raising and slaughtering an animal. So the process, the just like really high level scientific process of cultivated meat requires taking a small sample of animal cells, and then giving those cells something to eat. So that's something we call cell culture media. It's basically like nutrient juice that gives the cells the sugars and salts and amino acids needed to grow. And in that nutrient soup is also something we call growth factors, which helps tell the cells how to behave. Do we want you to rapidly proliferate? Do we want you to differentiate and turn into either fat or muscle tissue? And so in order to create more sophisticated cuts of meat, we also need something called scaffolding, which is basically a three-dimensional structure for the cells to grow around so that you can form like a cultivated meat steak, for example. And this entire process is housed in something we call a bioreactor, which basically creates the conditions similar to the body of an animal that makes it possible for these cells to thrive. And so what this technology makes possible is basically getting the exact same kind of meat that we love all the way down to the molecular level. Your hamburgers and hot dogs and sausages and T-bone steaks, and doing all of that without needing the very resource-intensive process of raising and slaughtering an animal. And so I'm sure we'll dive into a discussion of the reasons we believe that this technology helps contend with some of the most pressing problems that we're facing in the world today. But that's kind of just to establish baseline vocabulary. That's what we mean by cellular agriculture.
Right. Sorry. Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, it can sometimes, I guess, can be a little bit confusing because there are different lines of technology, and they sometimes get maybe thrown in together. If consumers think about the Beyond Meat, is that versus the Impossible Burger versus then the cellular agriculture, that products that are not yet on the market, are they all the same, or how different they are? And maybe we can get a little bit into that later as well. But you actually addressed my kind of next question: is why is it important to replace meat products or to advance these technologies? So, a question for all of you, and maybe Patricia, if you like to start.
Sure. I think, there are so many reasons why it is important that I don't even know where to start. First of all, and I think with many of you it resonates, that of course it is kind of an ancient procedure to have to kill an animal to eat their meat, when we know there are so many different ways that we can get the nutrients that we need, right? So the question is, what does it do to us as a society, and how can we move on from there and feed everyone that is on this planet and will live on this planet? There are projections that that we will be, by 2050, we will have a meat consumption that's just not sustainable with how we want to live on this planet. We see the impacts of climate change already. We see what's happening with the rainforest in Brazil that needs to be burned down to have more space to grow feed for animals that we then eat. And there is now there are a lot of people now aligned with how inefficient that process is. And there was a study, for example, at UC Berkeley already, I think 20 years ago, where they found out that if we would use the land that we have right now to grow plants, we would be able to actually feed everyone on this planet. So I think there will be a lot of different solutions necessary to actually address this solution. So I think that what the GFI does, and also what Chris does, is super important to support all these different solutions.
Chris, do you would like to add to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I think it's probably one of the biggest issues facing our planet because of the countless number of reasons as to why this is a huge problem for the planet. So population is, as it was indicated, supposed to grow significantly between now and 2050. I think it's been estimated by WHO, I might be mistaken, that the food supply will need to increase somewhere between 60 to 70% in order to just keep up with population. That's not even talking about removing animals from the existing factory farming system. That's just like, we'll have to have 60% more food. So that has huge ethical implications. It also is just not something that's viable given the amount of arable land that is available and given the CO2 implications of that. So today, if you look at it, depending on how you look at the numbers, factory farming is the second or third largest contributor to climate change. And that's just not a future that I want to be contributing to. So I think we need to make concerted efforts to change the way that we eat. It has obviously huge ethical benefits to move towards that, and something that's near and dear to my heart. But obviously, for other consumers who maybe that might not be their priority, certainly I think we can appeal to their survivalism and desire to have a planet that is healthier. So yeah, lots of great reasons to get involved in the space.
Yeah, I want to hop in here quickly to just like massively echo everything that Patricia and Chris have said. I think that was really well articulated. And you know, beyond the fact that we're really running up against our planetary limits. We're running out of land on Earth, fish in the sea, and it's clear that our climate cannot continue to support conventional means of producing meat. I also think there's this underappreciated I think that the effects that conventional animal agriculture have on public and global health it's an entire category of harms that I think we should be paying a little bit more attention to. So I think we are obviously all experiencing this collective health crisis together with COVID-19. The UN Environmental Program actually today just released a report about I think the 7 ways to prevent the next global pandemic, to mitigate the risk of zoonotic disease. And for those of you who don't know, the novel coronavirus is a zoonotic disease. It originates from animals and then has transmitted over to humans. And that actually moving away from factory farming, in which many animals are held in close containment, and those environments serve as breeding grounds for disease that then mutate really quickly and hop over to human hosts. In order to kind of mitigate the risk of future pandemics, they say it's critical to move away from industrial animal agriculture and towards means of production that aren't just better for the planet, but much better for human health. So yeah, I think even as we're enduring this pandemic right now, it's really important for us to be thinking not just how do we survive this, but how do we prevent any future generations from having to experience pandemics like this or worse than this in the future. And it's really up to us to make sure that that this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Very important point. And also, not just viral pandemics, also the rise of antibiotic resistance is also a concern, I think, that is fueled by factory farming, because most of the antibiotics that we use are used to feed the animals to treat their diseases, make them produce more meat, which can fuel the rise of antibiotic resistances. And so, Patricia, so how are we getting this? How are we making this happen? So what is your company, for example, specifically doing?
Yeah, so I think any company that's in cellular agriculture and trying to make meat right now is really on the mission to make this whole system viable, to make it efficient. I saw a question in the chat also, how efficient is it, right? The question is, how inefficient is it to grow a whole animal if we only eat part of it? And also a lot of it is, and that sounds a little bit cruel, wasted by the animal breathing and having to have its typical functions, right? Enjoying life is what we really call it, right? So I think separating this and being able to grow meat, real meat in a cell culture is really the goal for any company that's trying to do that right now. And if we're talking about meat, of course, we're not only talking about the steak or the final cut that everyone knows. There's a lot of things. Actually, I, as a European, was very surprised when I came to the US and I saw, oh, meat in salads, meat everywhere, really. So there's a huge meat consumption that comes from the amazing land that was available to people here to grow a lot of food, right? And now this perception needs to change, that we're running out of that space, as Chris said, rightfully. So any cultured meat company tries to make meat from different sources. Some use pork, some use beef, some use more exotic species. And I think it's a great time right now to see all that innovation coming from that. And I love thinking about the future of what we can eat, actually, by kind of not being confined to a certain type of animal, but really having the ability to combine different types of meat, eat meat that is maybe not available right now because the animals are not amenable to industrial agriculture. Remember that all the cattle that we see, for example, that's intensively farmed, was chosen because they actually put on meat really quickly and can grow in this type of conditions that's not really natural for them anyway, right? So I think by getting really a food solution that's not confined to these things, we can get more nutritious meat, we can get a wider variety of interesting flavors. And that's, I think, what the companies are working on. And each company has a different kind of spin to that, and is, of course, also trying to get the development of the technology further, which is one thing that we really need. And that's, again, we need more people in there. We need more brains to solve some of these very pressing issues.
I really like this point that Patricia said about, I think most of the companies are trying to like match the taste and the texture and the sensory experience of conventional meat products, just producing it a better way, but basically getting to parity. But I love what Patricia said about this potential to move beyond the protein sources that humans have traditionally been attached to, because if we think about the animals and the kinds of meat that we've been eating, really it's all a product of historical happenstance. Like, these animals just happen to domesticate alongside us. It's not that we actually chose the pig out of thousands and thousands of species and said that's the most delicious and nutritious animal for us to consume. So what does cellular agriculture make possible? It makes possible to ethically expand the human palate beyond these conventional meat sources, so that we can, far in the future, have entirely new dimensions of like culinary experience as well, beyond just. I think that's the more fun part of cellular agriculture that we rarely talk about.
Yeah. So can we eat dinosaurs at some point? It's a new company idea for you there. So why are we not satisfied with the Beyond Burger or the Impossible Burger or products coming from that space? Why do we have to replicate meat? Question to all of you.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I think this is more of a psychological question than anything else. I think as a species, as humans, we are notably terrible at change. So I think, anyone who's listening to this, who's been on a journey that's changed their diet, there are not many people who do that because change is very difficult. And so if consumers feel that they are giving something up, they are either paying more money, it is less convenient, or it doesn't taste as good, they're probably not going to change. And I think that's largely GFI's philosophy, is that it needs to taste as good or better. It needs to be the same price or cheaper, and it needs to be equally as convenient. At that point, you will see consumers change. And I think you can draw parallels to other industries like the electric car industry, right? Today, as of a week ago, Tesla is the most valuable car company in the world. 10 years ago, people were laughing at what Elon Musk was talking about. And the only reason that they've gone from zero to hero is because they've proven that the product is better in every single dimension. Only once you do that will people change. I think, certainly there were people that would buy the Priuses before, but it was not going to be everyone. And so we just need to see the same thing happen with meat, and we need to appeal to people's true personalities and our shortcomings as a species.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. And I think you are very excited as well about the seafood market, or seafood products. And so what do you see there? Is it still, I think in the press and companies are focusing a lot on replacing beef and pork or chicken. Do you think there's still a lot of lack in the seafood space? What's the opportunity there?
I mean, if you look at it from a pure numbers perspective, there just aren't as many startups that are attacking seafood as they are terrestrial-based product equivalents. I think that's a matter of time for it to change. I've even noticed in the last 6 months, there are more seafood-related startups that are coming around. There's a new incubator called Hatch that is just coming to focus on plant-based aquatic foods, and as well as, I think, cellular agriculture foods. So I think it's a matter of time, but it's just been by virtue, I think, of what people eat most often, and that, entrepreneurs will typically focus on things that are, that products that resonate with them. So you're more likely at first to see, the burger or chicken or bacon. Those are going to be your lead products. But yes, there's still a ton of opportunity, especially in seafood. I mean, we talk about fish as though it's one species. Fish is, a class of species. And so you need a startup arguably for every different species of fish. And then you've got the whole crustacean side. So, to put it in perspective, I think there's less than, in the last 2 years, there's probably less than 20 companies in both cellular, ag, and plant-based that have received over $1 million in funding. And that's just off the top of my head. I might be wrong, but it's a small number of companies. So there's still a lot left to be done.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that. Yeah, I think a lot of times when we talk about environmental sustainability, we forget about our oceans. And Chris is absolutely right that I think one of the more tractable areas and the most neglected areas in this field today is seafood. I would encourage everyone who's interested in this to check out gfi.org/seafood. We have a sustainable seafood initiative that is all about helping form more companies in this space that focus on seafood, helping build more open access tools like our cell line repository that collects different marine seafood cell lines so that it lowers barriers of access to entrepreneurs and scientists who are trying to do more research in this space. But I think this field in general needs a lot of really talented and smart and passionate people who want to build a better world, devoting their lives to this task. Because there's a lot of, as Raf was saying in the beginning, there are beyonds and impossibles out there in the world, and we've been so excited about it, and it is easy to kind of believe that the future of food is here, and we've kind of arrived at it, but we're nowhere near that. I think we have so much. Alternative proteins alternative meat products comprise 1% of the global meat market presently. So if we're really to displace, kind of start moving away from industrial animal agriculture, we need to overcome some of these key technological bottlenecks that are preventing us from either reaching, price or quality parity presently.
Yeah, I guess the lack of the innovation in the seafood space may also be a result of our lack of emotional connection with fish, and we're much more drawn towards or cows and pigs and chickens maybe. So we don't really care that much about fish, I might say. And so Patricia, so we. When do you think the first meat products, cell-based meat products, will be on the market? What is still critically missing, and how fast can we scale? I think I heard some people from the industry telling us, oh yeah, we have our first have our first product on the market or in restaurants next year, but I think it still didn't happen yet.
I think I heard even last year, I heard somebody saying 2018 at one point. So I think all these things tell you one thing: we don't know, and I don't have my crystal ball here. It's going to be some time until you see a cell-based steak on the market for sure, because there's just a lot of science to do, and science is hard. I mean, who am I kidding, right? We need a lot of time and work and money that flows into cellular agriculture to realize that it is possible. But again, it's a lot of work and we need to do the work. So for other products, let's say mixed products, plant-based with cell-based, that will be way earlier. I think there are a lot of companies that are on a really good road, especially with fats, animal fats, that are slightly easier to scale than muscle cells, just because of the way these cells are. As we all know, if we eat more, we mostly grow on our bellies and other parts that like to grow fat because that grows faster. So anyway, I think that's the first products that we're going to see, either hybrid products or products that have a small amount of cell-based products in there. And I actually think that that's going to be super exciting and open up a lot of new products and flavors and a new way to see things. And because you mentioned Beyond, and I think when you mention Beyond, you also need to mention Impossible. I'm eternally grateful for what they're doing, because they're paving the way to change consumer perception. Who would have thought, for example, that people would accept something like Impossible, which is openly saying we're using GMOs, right? I think, that is the first sign of a society that realizes that we need to change the way we eat. And one way to change it is by using the technology that we as humans built to build the food that we want to eat.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to address quickly one question in the chat about the neglect of seafood. And I think because we chatted about this before, I'm not 100% sure if you addressed it, but I think there's also a lack in the technology itself. Like there are not that many cell lines developed, for example, to actually work on cell-based seafood. So
yeah, definitely.
And the question about, and the fact about, as far as I understand it, about scalability is we don't even have the infrastructure yet, right, to scale these products. So for example, the bioreactors, in order to produce these at mass scale, have not been designed yet. Am I right?
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. There's a lot of research, certainly, that's happening. And I would argue not nearly enough research, but there are certainly people designing bioreactors, single-use, tissue perfusion, whatever, like all different kinds of bioreactors that could house this process. Most of them right now are quite small. They're at like the 5 or 10 or 20 liter level, to my understanding. And when we're talking about feeding the entire world, we do need to be looking at 20,000 liter tanks. But there's an organization called the Cultivated Meat Modeling Consortium that is focused on tackling this question of scale, not about building giant bioreactors, which can be really, really expensive to start, but actually, rather than doing that really expensive iterative experimentation, taking miniaturized bioreactors, hooking it up to computer models, and simulating like the behavior of cells within that. So that's an entire field of research that's incredibly invaluable to our field and will accelerate our being able to build out that kind of infrastructure. But Raf, you're absolutely right that right now we have so many proofs of concept, and so far haven't scaled quite to the pilot level or even the production level. Production level, and certainly or we haven't scaled to the production level, and also haven't even gone to like the 1,000 liter tank level. And Patricia, you might know better than I do.
No, you're perfectly right, Amy. And the only thing I wanted to add there is that the issue of scaling really is also one of what is the perfect bioreactor and what do we want to do. Whether we want to make something like a ground meat product requires a very different bioreactor than if you want to grow an actual tissue. And that ties into that nobody ever has produced large amounts of tissues at scale. And that's why it is so important to have the money pouring in, the research pouring in, because just imagine if we can grow animal tissues, there will be a way that we can grow human tissues as well. So the implications of being able to do that is just, and I'm not talking about terminators, of course, I'm talking about regenerative medicine, but there is a huge potential not only for replacing animal agriculture, but also for really improving human health here.
Perfect. And talking about now a little bit more about health and the whether there are maybe any risks about this technology concerning health. And so we had a couple questions come in on that. So anyone who would like to take this are these cell-based products as bad as real meat products? Can they be healthier? And are there any other health concerns because of how they are produced?
I can take this one. I think the like short, honest answer to that is that we have a lot of questions that we need to explore more closely. There are many, many reasons to believe that cultivated meat is along every single dimension going to be better for human health, both in terms of its risk mitigation of zoonotic disease, its reduction of foodborne illness, and the fact that this entire process likely doesn't need to use any antibiotics, so it won't contribute to the growing problem of antibiotic resistance. Usually when people ask about health, they're asking about kind of individual level health. So like health and nutrition. And I think it's a really good question. If we fully recapitulate the experience of genuine animal meat with cells, then if it's 1-to-1, will red meat still contribute to cardiovascular disease? Likely so. Does cellular agriculture make it possible to fine-tune the nutritional composition of genuine animal meat so you can be eating a steak that instead of having a lot of bad fats has a lot of great fats from like fish, for example? Like, can you just be very careful about choosing the nutritional composition of these products so that they are better for human health? Absolutely. So that's something that cellular agriculture makes possible that just like raising and slaughtering animals can't. And I think that's one way to answer that question. But the true answer is that like we have yet to know the food safety implications of this because we're super early on. And we have a project at GFI working with regulatory agencies and working with groups of startups and academics to form like a safety dossier right here in the beginning of this field to make sure that we're developing the right food safety and quality monitoring like regulatory frameworks to keep consumers safe. So those conversations are happening, and the FDA isn't going to approve something that is going to have harmful repercussions on human health. And based on all of the conversations happening so far, it seems very likely, most likely, that these products will be substantially better for human health, both on the population level and the individual level.
Yeah, and maybe just to build on that, I think there were a lot of questions that were submitted before today's talk that are sort of connected all around, like which one is better and can they be as good, or do they have the same trade-offs, or do they have the same sort of macronutritional issues? There's been a lot of press recently that says, your Beyond Burger and your Impossible Meat Burger have too much sodium or things like that. I think it's it's important to recognize that these are effectively V1 of those given products. And unlike an animal, where although you can talk about selective breeding and stuff like that, but for the most part, what's beautiful about this whole category is that these are just V1 products, and the companies will continue to churn out improvements. The same way your software, your operating system gets better every year. Food will get better every year. So V2, V3, V4, we will get to the point, undoubtedly in time, where the plant-based and cell-based products are superior to their real-world counterparts.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, with both of you, Amy and Chris, on that. I just recently had the pleasure to talk to Chris Muse from Beyond, and he said exactly that thing. He's like, we're trying to get the sodium level down, and we're iterating with the product to make it healthier. But also their idea was not to make something that's healthier than meat, right? Their idea is to make something that tastes and looks and feels like meat, and at least is at the same level of unhealthiness. So you can replace it with something that's better for the planet and better for the animals, right? That was the first idea. But yeah, I see the iterations in both plant-based and cell-based going into the direction where you can actually make products that are healthier. And there are several companies that are working on that. For example, you can engineer cells in a way that they produce certain vitamins that you can find in regular meat. So I think there's a big focus on these health things, but also, as Amy said, there's a lot of things we don't know. And there is a lot of data that we need yet to produce to make sure that we know that it's healthy. And that's also the advantage. If you eat meat from a supermarket, you do not know what's in there. If you eat cell-based meat, you will know exactly what is in there. And that's a huge advantage as well.
So would you say these products are would be labeled as GMO, or could there be a risk in consumer acceptance because how these products are produced, and what does the industry or organizations have to make sure of so that the consumer accepts these products, or is there actually is the consumer concerned about it? Do you have any insight on this?
If I might jump in, and I'm sure both Amy and Patricia will have better answers to color in the lines. I think it's not like a one size fits all for any of these issues. Conceivably you could have cell-based meat that is exactly the same as the real world analog and has the same health benefits and trade-offs. Arguably, there could be an enhanced version that is GMO that is, healthier for you, but it's not the real deal. And some consumers want one, and some consumers want others. Same way in the toothpaste aisle, you can get one with whitening and one without. It's all going to come down to consumer demand. There won't be just one product. It's my firm belief that you will have multiple different products with different benefits that appeal to different markets.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when we talk about GMO, we are all eating GMO right now. At least, maybe not all of you, depending what you eat. But most of the feed that cattle, that any livestock gets when they are in a factory farm, when they are when they're being fed corn or soy, that's all GMO soy and corn. There's a huge market on that. So the question is, there's a lot about GMO also that needs to be discussed, because without GMO, we wouldn't have insulin, for example. That's, revolutionized how diabetic people live and so on. So I think there needs to be a broader discussion and understanding of what is GMO, why can it be bad, why can it be good, and what do we do with it, which is more the question about, are we using GMO or not? One example is that even as I said, when you eat meat, you don't know what you're eating because you don't know how these cells of this animal have changed and what genes they exactly have in them, right? But if you have a cell-based product, you will know exactly what the genetic profile of it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, I think something that Chris and Patricia both touched on, just that there's actually nothing inherent to the cellular agriculture process that requires genetic modification. So there are going to be companies like Chris said that are taking one approach, and others that use the scientific tools available to them to design more efficient processes, and those might be GMO products and might then be required to be labeled GMO. But there's nothing, that's a common misconception about cellular agriculture. Not all cultivated meat products will require genetic modification. And I think it's just, yeah, it's going to be really hard to, I think our collective hope is that there is some kind of awakening where we, like, we realize as a society that, like, we have to use the best available tools that we have. And that's, right now, that's science, right? We have science and we should use it and we should be safe about it, but we shouldn't be science deniers, and we shouldn't dismiss an entire category of tools because of, arguably some unfortunate applications of that tool in recent decades. So I think we all play a really important role in shifting consumer perceptions around what GMOs are and aren't. And really how we should be thinking about GMOs are, it's like, I think Thomas Jonas from Sustainable Bioproducts says this, it's just like a copy and paste tool, or like a cut and paste tool. And you can use this for good or for evil, but like, we are up against so many important problems right now in the world. We should use the tools that we have to contend with those problems.
Agreed. And Amy, I think GFI has done some research on this, but has really shown that the first three most important, like, people will talk a lot about GMOs as an issue, but the actual percentage of customers that use that as a key input in the decisions they make, if we're talking about the whole set of consumers, I think it's a distant fourth, anything to do with nutrition. I think it's really price, taste, and convenience. And nutrition really is a very distant fourth factor when it comes to influencing what people buy. So yes, we talk about GMOs a lot. I mean, I think the definition for what constitutes GMO is pretty like any modification, which is kind of funny. It is overly demonized, but I think we might be making a big fuss over nothing in the grand scheme of things, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of consumers aren't really going to let that influence them one way or the other. If we're talking about the whole food system and disrupting like the majority of it.
I agree. And also one thing that I want to emphasize is you cannot cater to every customer with the particular product that you're doing, right? That's another thing we need to remember when we create products. And there are cellular agriculture products that are not GMO. I think, some of the nice first products that we saw out there, if we look at companies like Clara Foods that just really take one protein out of egg and produce it with another organism. And the simplicity of that idea, being a scientist that was constantly thinking about how can we change proteins for industrial applications that we don't eat, right? I was struck by having that idea of just replicating exactly something, just using a different organism. So we will see a lot more about that. And I think I'm constantly in awe about all the creativity that scientists now have in how we can make the future of food.
Yeah, those are all great points. And a couple questions that are related to that vegans, for example, are concerned about these new technologies, and how do you convince them so that it's safe? But then also I like to quote the Beyond founder, who said, like, we're not marketing towards vegans, we're marketing towards all people, right? So and if you are concerned about these technologies, then please just keep on eating whole foods, which is the most healthiest option anyways. So I hope we addressed this question sufficiently, and we only have about 5 minutes left. So let's see, if you have more questions, please submit them to the Q&A. I think we covered a lot already during our discussion. One point actually is also another ethical point about animal welfare. So if those technologies, the cell-based technology, ever comes to scale, and how are animals still involved in this process? Will animals still be harmed?
I can take this one. Yeah, animals are minimally involved in this process. So I think many of us actually who are in the field come from an animal welfare background, or at least come from the place in which like we are motivated to move away from industrial animal agriculture because we want to reduce animal suffering. And so there are many, many ways that one can extract cells from animals. A biopsy is what I mentioned before, and that can be harmless. So it's just a small extraction of cells. It might hurt a little bit, but that small cluster of cells actually will form the basis of a cell line that can then fuel I guess production scale volumes of meat production. So it actually isn't, somebody asked here in the chat, like how many animals will be needed? I don't have a good answer for you, but I think it maybe helps to reframe it when you understand how quite minor extractions can power like very large volumes of meat. And actually, if you immortalize those cell lines, which is what these companies and researchers are focused on doing, you really don't need to extract multiple times or cells from multiple animals. So it's really minimal involvement. I think something that might also be concerning some of the audience members is the use of fetal bovine serum in order to feed these cells. And I think it's also really important to mention that fetal bovine serum not only is really bad for animals, but it's really bad for producers. There's nothing reliable about fetal bovine serum, and it can't form the basis of a food system. So actually, most of the companies and researchers that I'm acquainted with are moving away from serum and using synthetic growth media in order to feed these cells. So there's a huge push, both in industry and academia, to have animal-free animal-free process and animal-free feedstocks, save for the small extraction of cells in the beginning that then are immortalized and form the basis of this entire industry. So I guess the answer is minimal.
Okay, great. I'd like to address two more questions if we have the time. Patricia, Chris, and Amy, are you still good? Yeah. Okay, because we're advancing 2 o'clock now. But one question maybe also related to that is about the food system, the fairness, and the justical aspects of the food system. So, how do you see this specific technology align or collide with the food sovereignty movement? Sovereignty movement, sorry.
You know, I'm not sure I'm familiar with the food sovereignty movement, but in general, as we all mentioned, there are a variety of problems with the current food system that were laid bare by the current pandemic as well. It involves the farmers that don't get paid a fair price for their meat, and meat is way too cheap the way it is right now. Small farmers have a hard time to survive. There's the question about workers in meat factories, in slaughterhouses right now, that not get paid fairly, that have to work under conditions that probably none of us wants to work under. So if we're talking about disrupting the whole meat supply chain and building something entirely new, I think here's our chance to build something that's more just, that is more decentralized also, and talking about bringing more jobs back to rural areas by having decentralized, you can say, like breweries for it be it meat or other cellular agriculture products, I think the opportunity is huge. So again, call for everyone that is passionate about this, whether you are a scientist or you are in another field, right? So, talking social science, talking economy, and so on, analysts. We need everyone to really work together to build this future and reimagine the food system that we have right now. And I think that's really what's needed.
Yeah, that was really well put, Patricia. I think I will add to that food is at the center of any fight for global equality, for any social justice movement, because I can think of few rights more important to protect and to equalize than the right to eat or the right to be fed. And so I think this is a really, really important question, because we're right now at the very beginning of forming an industry. And we have the option right now to build a better industry in all of the ways, not just one that's more environmentally sustainable, not just one that's better for the animals, but one that's better for human prosperity, that treats people well, that ensures equitable access to food. And so I really, really appreciate this question. And I think it is up to the stakeholders in this industry to hold each other accountable to building a truly better system. So just like it's possible to have a plant-based meat factory that's terrible for the environment, it's possible to have a plant-based meat factory that's terrible to their human workers, and also to others along the supply chain that supply this industrial process. And I do think that a lot of the thinking that we need to be doing right now is, look, we know that that we're working within a very capitalistic system that historically has been quite extractive, right? And exploitative in a lot of ways. So maybe the question that we need to explore more deeply is, knowing that this industry is going to be housed in this same system, how can we build a system that is by design, or an industry that is by design non-extractive and nourishes people and ensures equality of food access? I think those are really, really good and important questions. GFI has a project with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in India that's focused on, as we are in improving plant-based meat, there's this opportunity to use better and more, or to make common plant sources more nutritious and accessible to all sorts of people. And there's a really high proportion of the Indian population that is malnourished and doesn't have access to proper nutrition. So our project with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is optimizing staple crops like millets to be best for plant-based meat, but in doing so, increasing their protein content so that this very accessible crop is also helping nourish people in the world who otherwise don't have reliable sources of nutrition. So I think there's a real opportunity in this field to be elevating the livelihoods of people all across the supply chain by being really thoughtful and deliberate about the world that we want to build in the future. So I'm really optimistic that we can do that, and I'm really glad you raised that question. And we need to be thinking about it far more critically. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we should probably do a whole webinar on this as well. And Chris, do you want to add to that?
I don't think I can. That was already addressed perfectly, I think.
Okay, great. And we can also share more answers. If we haven't addressed all your questions, we can share more resources with you via email and follow up with you via email as well. So maybe to a last question, as you have mentioned before as well, that we need talent to advance this space. What kind of advice can you give young people who want to work in this space?
I'm happy to take that. I think follow your passion sounds cheesy, but really that's it. And sometimes, that is not a straight path. But if you know what you're passionate about it, your path will lead you there. So look for mentors that do what you do and that can help you to understand how they got there, and then see what parts of that would be applicable to your own path, right? I think mentorship is a beautiful way. Reach out to people in the space. A lot of people are happy to give advice and to share the advice. I know there are a lot of internship programs, for example, several accelerators that are out there that work with very young startups like my startup, that these startups are always looking for interns, So there are a lot of ways to get connected and reach out, and just be persistent. Everybody's super busy. Persistence is also key. If you really want something, that's the key to getting it.
Yeah, that's great, Patricia. I think I have very little to add to that, actually. I dropped a student resource guide here in the chat for any of those who are kind of earlier in career, maybe based at a high school or university, and want to navigate the various educational resources available to you. I think the only point I would say is that this future that we've envisioning isn't inevitable, and that without people like you who want to focus your energy and your passion at solving the many problems we have between us and this ethical food system that we envision, it could very well not come to fruition. So I would say that it's so important to remember something that Chris and Patricia have both said, but this industry isn't saturated yet. There's so many questions left to be solved. There's so many companies left to be formed, and you're very, very much needed. So I would recommend checking out that student resource guide. And I would also say that, I have a very nonlinear background. Many of us have super nonlinear backgrounds for entering this space. That's okay. I've had I don't know, it's just been a really wiggly path to being here, and I feel like I've landed very much in the right place. But I don't have food tech experience, and there are so many ways to apply different frameworks to solving the food system problem. And I really encourage you to do what Patricia has said. Chase what excites you, and it's okay to follow that at every turn, and be picking up unique ways of looking at different problems in the world and assessing your role within it. And it's all right if it's not a super linear path. I think very few of us in the alternative protein space have a very cut and clear path because it's brand new. So yeah, I think you're very needed here, and I hope that you will find that resource guide helpful.
Yeah, if you're thinking about starting a company, do it. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much for being part of this panel, sharing your insights. A round of virtual applause, please, for our panelists. And thank you so much all for attending and sending in your questions. I hope we covered most of them. As I said, we're happy to follow up with you via email, and this is recorded, and you can also copy and save the answers or the comments in the chat. And Chris Shepard, any last words?
No, I think that's it. That was great. And yeah, we will follow up all the resources that were shared in the chat. We'll share those in an email with everybody after this, along with the recording. So that should answer most of the questions we didn't get to.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Chris and Patricia, this was so much fun.
It was. Thanks everyone for tuning in too. I hope we get to meet in person too at one point,
Yes. Yeah. At a future conference, maybe. It was great.
Yeah.
I feel like we were just hanging out. This was fun.
And thanks, Raphael and Chris as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us. All right.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks.